gentlemen, what a beautiful sight this is. Just a beautiful sight. You know what else was a beautiful sight last night? If any of you were so fortunate as to go to Mr. Smith's in Georgetown, we had a surprise guest, right? Yeah, a few of you, right? Ron Paul shows up and surprises everybody. And you have to love this man. He actually said, because he showed up maybe 10:15, he actually said, surely people aren't still out carousing after 10 p.m. I want to tell you guys a story you probably haven't read about. It involves a federal judge confronting the Assistant Attorney General. And this federal judge said, "Are you telling me that if the president appointed a subordinate to take you into custody, execute you in the morning, you would have no way to enjoin him from doing that?" And the Assistant Attorney General replied, "I'll have to think that one over." Earlier in their exchange, the federal judge had said, "Is it your understanding of the Constitution that it limits the power of Congress, it limits the power of the judiciary, but it does not limit the executive?" And the Assistant Attorney General replied, "That is how we read the Constitution." Now that, as horrifying as it is pretty typical of our situation today, and yet those words were not uttered in 2008. They were uttered in 1952 in the presidential tenure of Harry Truman. Our problems go back beyond George W. Bush. We've had one president after another who has been responsible for crimes against the Constitution. I've heard it said that Woodrow Wilson makes George W. Bush look like a pro bono lawyer for the ACLU. And incidentally, while I'm on the Harry Truman subject, Harry Truman thought that because he's the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, he has the power to seize all the steel mills in the country. So a newspaper reporter asked him, "Mr. President, if you believe you have the inherent power to seize all the steel mills, do you also believe you can seize all the newspapers and the radio stations?" Harry Truman replied, "Well, in a situation like that, the president would just have to do whatever he thought was best for the country. That's the answer to your question." And Harry Truman also thought that because he was commander-in-chief, he could send troops anywhere around the world he wanted, send 1 million men around the world if he wanted to. He could wage war in Korea without consulting Congress because, after all, the United Nations authorized the war. What more do you need? And also, he's commander-in-chief, so he can send the troops anywhere he wants. Well, the neocons today take the same line that the Democrat Harry Truman took. They take this line that the president is free to send troops anywhere he wants to. But at the time, who was the man who stood up against Harry Truman? Mr. Republican, Senator Robert Taft, one of the great inspirations for Ron Paul. The neocons try to tell you, oh, there's nothing unusual about a president sending troops without consulting Congress. They give you this phony line that presidents have done this hundreds of times in American history. Well, listen, I don't have time for the details here, but trust me, the neocons on this are liars, and I realize it's a redundancy to use neocons and liars in the same sentence. Thomas Jefferson feared exactly what has come to pass, that if the federal government has a monopoly on interpreting the Constitution, what do you think is going to happen? It's going to interpret the Constitution in its own favor. And that's exactly what we have now. So regardless of how clearly worded that Constitution is, they'll find a way around it. You would think the First Amendment was pretty clear about the freedom of speech. So, in World War I, people were thrown in jail for writing articles and giving speeches. Eugene Debs was in jail for giving a speech, and in 1920 he decided to make the best of it, so he ran for president from prison. He got 1 million votes. And a popular campaign button read, "For President, Convict number 9653. Now all of this is stuff that I talk about in my book, Who Killed the Constitution. But I'm not here to promote some book. Well, as a matter of fact, I am here to promote a book, but it's not my own. I want to recommend a book to you that you guys got to read, if you haven't already. And it's this one. It's Dr. Paul's book. It's The Revolution, a Manifesto. Now, this thing, you may think to yourself, oh, I already know what Ron Paul thinks. I already know all this stuff. Well, maybe you don't, but you know what? Even if you do, you can take great pleasure in reading this thing and watching the gentlemanly Dr. Paul, in his own gentle, gentlemanly way, take his opponents down to the floor and mop that baby with them. Now, it could be that governments are just fated to continue growing. It could be that you can never restrain them. But one thing we know for sure is they will not be restrained if people don't care or if people are fed only a diet of propaganda. And we all remember from The Matrix that choice. You can take that blue pill and just coast through life, going to the shopping mall, watching TV, and not knowing what's going on. Or, if you thirst for the truth, you take the red pill. And that's what this book is. It's the red pill. If Americans read this book, we would have our revolution tomorrow morning. And what a surprise. The second week it's on the New York Times bestseller list, it reaches #1. And what did we hear from the media? Crickets, right? You could hear crickets. Not a word, nothing. You go to major book chains. You say, look, this book has been on the New York Times bestseller list for 10 weeks. I'm sure you got it in your bestseller section. Now, if they have it, they've hidden it under some book on gardening somewhere. But I'm telling you, my friends and family need to look at this thing. Now, we were told we're going to limit ourselves to 10 minutes. So I'm going to try and be faithful to that the best I can. So I'm going to leave you with this. I can't tell the future. I don't know if we're going to win. Maybe we'll win someday. Maybe we won't. I don't know. But I do know that we are surrounded by evil. And we have to fight it no matter what the odds seem. Because whether or not we're going to win, it's not only morally right to fight, but let me tell you something, it's also a lot of fun to annoy these bastards. Let's remind them there is one segment of the population that is not plugged into the Matrix. We are on to them. It drives them crazy. And let me tell you something, that the day the Republican convention opens, Ron Paul's having a book signing on the outskirts of St. Paul. What's John McCain going to think of that? We're surrounded by the John McCains, the Bob Doles, Hillary Clintons, Barack Obamas, Chuck Schumers, all these interchangeable nobodies and liars and thieves and killers. They say we're crazy? That's the mainstream of America. The mainstream of America, American politics, means heavy intervention in the economy, you screw up the dollar, and then you screw up every country around the world. That's the mainstream. If you say maybe we shouldn't destroy the dollar, maybe we shouldn't bomb everybody in the world, that makes you an extremist in this screwed up society. Barack Obama, as my friend Charles Goyette just said, Barack Obama's no change. He can't promise he's going to get the troops out of Iraq. He'll do his best, but he can't make any promises. And he's not going to get the troops out of the other 129 countries because he says that would be to fall into isolationism. Where do they find these people? And by the way, look at who's in Obama's foreign policy team. Everybody's yelling at suggestions. You're all right, but the one I want to pick is Madeleine Albright. You remember her? She's the former Secretary of State who in the 1990s, when Leslie Stahl asked her, what do you think about the fact that the sanctions on Iraq have killed 500,000 children? What do you think of that? And she said, we believe the price has been worth it. That's the big change we're getting? What a scam. ladies and gentlemen, here is what we can do. We can get to Minneapolis, no matter what it takes. September 1st and 2nd, and let's make a stand that they will never forget. Thank you all.